All right, guys, in today's video, we're talking about downswing sequence and reversing your downswing sequence. To my right here, Mr. Trevor Salzman, no T. Trevor, thanks for coming out today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. Trevor's awesome coach down in Aventura, down here in South Florida. We're going to link all his stuff down in the description down below. We'll get to that later on. But in today's video, we're talking downswing sequence, and there's one or two really good drills that we're going to show you throughout that can really help your ball striking. But before we get to that, I want to just give you some info and talk through what we see most amateur golfers do incorrectly.
Yep,
with their
100%.
sequence, and what we want the downswing sequence to actually look like. So, Trevor, if you could lead us off from here, and like, let's say we're building my swing, their swing, anyone's swing.
Yep.
And we want the good version of the downswing sequence. What is that versus the bad version?
So for me, when I see what I see out of a bad version of the downswing, I always see a very quick steepening of the shaft. So the first thing that I see that starts to move is I usually see the hands move first, followed by the arms, shoulders, rib cage, pelvis. So we get that reversed the wrong direction, if that makes sense.
It's like top down.
Exactly, it's going top down. It would be like me if I was pitching, be like, I'm right here and I'm gonna go hand first, arm next, shoulders, and all of this. That's not going to be very efficient when it comes to creating speed. So what I prefer to see, once I get up to the top of my golf swing up here, I wanna see the pelvis moving first, the rib cage moving second, followed by the shoulder movements in order to create the most efficiency out of the golf swing. So that's what's gonna help expedite and speed up the arms, the hands, and therefore the golf club very naturally.
Yeah, exactly. So to be able to get that in there, let's say pelvis, rib cage, shoulder, right in that order. If you're taking notes, pelvis, rib cage, shoulder. Where would someone start? Let's say without you seeing their swing.
Yep.
Like, hey, I want to train that in. I like that. I'm bought in that. I see good players do that, right? How do I start that process?
So the thing that I always look for in regards to when we're talking about, so these are all, firstly, I would call these spinal movements. So I like to refer to the pelvis. This would be the lower spine. The rib cage would be the mid spine, and the shoulders would be the upper spine. And why this is important, I think, for everybody to understand is if we look at what the pelvis is a massive bone structure. I can't just move the left side of my pelvis separately from the right side of my pelvis. I can move foot pressures that make it appear like the pelvis is moving. But if you look at it, it's actually connected to the sacrum. The pelvis is connected to your sacrum, your lower spine, and that is what controls all of those movements. So everything inside of this is spinal movement. So we've got the pelvis lower, rib cage is mid, shoulders are next. So it's very important, I think, in how we position the spine in regards to balance and how we actually create space in between vertebrae so that we can torque and we can actually separate those. So the first thing that I see out of players, why they're not able to move the way that I like them to, is they start to hinge from right here. So when I see—
right away at the setup.
Right at setup. And the number one reason why I see players starting with their arms first is almost always setup from my experience in teaching. So when I look at this right here, if I hinge from my pelvis, I have now just created a lever, an anchor that's basically, I like to call it, it's like shutting off the ability to transfer energy. So it's like kinking. It's like if you took a hose and turned it on full blast and you kinked it, everything stops right there. And what happens is when we go into extension of the spine and hinge, is we're taking vertebrae and we're actually pinching them. We're getting them closer together, so there's not room to actually torque the spine freely right there. So for me, the first thing that I always like to see is I want to see the pelvis very neutral, almost in like a standing posture. The more forward I bring it, the more I engage my glutes, and that now gives me the ability to bend from the middle part of my spine, which is actually balancing out two different masses. It balances out the mass in my pelvis, and it balances out the mass in my shoulders. So this is my hinge point now from basically my thoracic spine, my mid spine here. And from here, this is what gives me the ability to actually move. Like where I started to understand this better is if you look at like figure skaters, when they spin very quickly, they're never down here like this. They almost get into a ball position like this. Or if you look at a pitcher in the major leagues, they set up here like this to where they actually round the spine more as opposed to hinging from right there. And these are rotational sports that I've seen. So once we have where we've got the rib cage to where it's more perpendicular to the ground versus parallel to the ground, that gives me access to this. So this is what allows me to freely move this. I create space in between those vertebrae, and that's what allows me to start separating them.
So it's like, hey, if you're having the sequence poorly on the way down,
Yep.
you have to look at this part first.
It's my only non-negotiable with every player that I coach.
Okay.
That is my only non-negotiable.
Let's say a player goes in and they get that correct.
Yep.
So, hey, I'm in there, I got my setup pieces where I want.
Yep.
I'm like, all right, let's roll. I'm so used to going club, arms, shoulder, rib cage, pelvis.
Yep.
How do I even start that opposite direction?
Yep.
Do you go like right into a drill, feels? Like how would you start that?
So I'm always going to start off players initially in like what we would call like our impact zone. So it's going to be like hip high to hip high. So one of my drills that I like to do with a lot of players just to start to learn how to move differently is I'll have them get into their setup right here. They'll go here, and what I'm going to have you do is take your trail arm, put it on your lead shoulder, and from here you're going to keep the shoulder here and you're going to turn the pelvis, moving it backwards. So you're going to start to feel a stretch where the pelvis is moving away from the rib cage. The rib cage is now moving away from the shoulder, and so this oblique right here is going to start to elongate. And when we're staying on center, which this is very important right here, make sure you have a stick right here. So if you're videoing yourself, what I would see out of a lot of people is they do this. It's like, okay, I'm turning. And it's right, yeah, you are turning, but you're turning in a way that's probably going to make the golf club come over the top again, regardless of what we're doing. So have feedback when you do that. So I go right here, I hold my shoulder, and I'm going to work the pelvis back just inside of my heel, and I'm going to keep turning the rib cage until I feel like the seam line on the trail side of my body is reaching where the golf ball is.
Okay, that's a good.
And then that's putting me in trail side bend, and that's elongating my oblique on my lead side right there. So that's just feeling what impact actually is, because most people, I know me personally as well, the first time I felt this, I thought I was eating dirt. I felt so low to the ground. I was like, holy cow, I'm gonna order lo mein from China and hit back there.
And then you look at it on video when you're swinging, like, oh, I was just the same.
Yeah, I maintained my level. Exactly.
Now, I know, Trevor, you also do a couple really cool drills with this. One with the G-box and sort of the stick to get around.
Yep.
And the other one with the sticks across your shoulders.
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'm gonna take one stick, I'm gonna put this on my pelvis, and I'm gonna hold this one up here on my shoulder. So when I turn up to the top, I can obviously turn my upper spine, which is my shoulders, more than what my pelvis can. Now from here, we have alligator jaws. I'm gonna try and make this alligator jaws on my lower spine larger than what my upper spine is. What most of us do is we go together.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden this looks exactly the same, so I haven't created any separation there. And because of that, if I'm up here and I haven't created any separation, everything goes together, we can now see the direction that my arms are starting to move. They're going to kick out, and we're going to be swinging across the golf ball for a right-hander left, or a left-hander right.
And so
outside in.
Let me hop in there and try that, Trevor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I put these across, and someone could just use like, alignment rods or clubs or whatever.
Exactly, yep.
We're holding this one, let's say I never did this before, this one here, and this one across my shoulders.
Yep, so you'd go there.
Normal backswing.
So you finish your turn. And now from there, like if I nudged your shoulder right there, you're gonna move that, there you go. So you can see your alligator jaws getting bigger because you're turning the lead side of your pelvis there.
Yeah, and so like from my vision, when the player looks down, this front stick that's out here, the distance between the two, to your point, you wanna get wider as I start down.
Correct.
Right? So this front one is going, the pelvis is going first, then my rib cage is following, and then the shoulders follow.
That's when you start to see the sticks catch up to each other. And then by the time we get through the golf ball, they catch up to where they align at each other when we finish looking at our target.
And this one I like a lot. I think that's super easy for someone to try and do and feel that. Are they doing this? You're doing like some reps without a ball for a while to feel that?
I think that's the only way that people learn, truthfully. Like if you're doing this right here and you're trying to think about 3 different movement patterns in your spine and you're trying to combine side bend into the mix as well, there's a lot going on neurologically up here where the brain's going to be scrambled. So I'm a huge believer. I love giving players homework drills that they can do at their house. It's like learn movement patterns before you try and put all of this stuff into play. I think that is super important.
Like get those motions right first, and then you could slowly add a ball. Add a ball in.
And then even more so, one more thing, even more so, do this at a speed that you are connecting with it neurologically. Like whenever I see somebody, they'll do this, they'll grab this, they'll put it on their shoulder real quick, and they'll put it on their pelvis, and what they'll do is they'll go, okay, and then they're like, all right, I separated.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, absolutely you did, but do you even know what body part you moved in order to create that? That's why people don't make changes, because they don't actually know what they're doing, and they haven't done it at a speed that they're aware of what actually happened.
Go slow enough.
Go slow. I can't stress that enough.
Now the G-Box,
Yep.
I think was a different version of kind of, could you show us this?
Absolutely.
Different version of kind of the same sort of feels.
So I took the G-Box right there, and I kind of made my own version of it. So what I did is I put a horse whip on this, and what I'm doing, so if this orange line right here, if that's my target line, I'm putting this perpendicular to where my target line is. So what happens, if I can see that club real quick, okay, if we do the wrong sequence here, so when I'm up here and I turn one, you can see how much your rib cage is actually moving in the backswing. If I never move my rib cage, that's what it looks like. Okay, so it gives me the awareness of what's happening in the backswing. But as well as if I go up to the top and my first move is arms and I start to go, I'm getting stuck underneath this.
Yes.
And why this is super important, I think, for players to understand is the arms have the ability to move so much faster than the body does. Like, a quick ratio for you, in a 100-mile-an-hour golf swing, the body moves 5 miles an hour. Your arms move 30 miles an hour. So that's a 6-to-1 ratio. So if my very first move at the top is this, there is no way for me to catch the body back up to what my arms are doing.
Yeah.
So I love using this as a visual to where I'll do it, like if we did our very first impact drill that I was saying, I've now cleared a runway for my arms to swing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and so when I'm hitting shots like this, I've got to make sure what starts to move first is my pelvis, then my rib cage. Now my rib cage is out of the way. Now I can fire my upper spine, my shoulders, and my chest.
And I know, because I want to do more on this in particular too in another video we're going to do.
Yeah.
I know one version we did with this too, I think you had that, and you actually have this through your belt loops as well.
Yep.
And so in terms of like, hey, pelvis, rib cage, shoulder,
Yep.
to be able to separate the pelvis from the rib cage and the shoulder.
Exactly.
I think you had one of these through there too, right?
So if I put this up here, what we could do is we could put another guy, if I get my pants on.
We'll have like,
if I get my pants on sideways, yeah, this is gonna be Tin Cup 101 right here.
Because you were almost getting like the stick back over this way, right? Remember when you were doing that, you were almost like getting that stick all the way turned around.
Yep.
By the time you got to impact.
100%.
I think that's a really good feel too.
You could use it alligator jaws again, or what you could do is you could line these two up and make sure the pelvis is moving at a higher rate than what the rib cage is. And that would be like for a visual, I would say, if you're standing in front of a mirror. I'm not sure I'd ask somebody to hit a golf ball with 7 sticks on them. But I think this is a good way. If I put this up high enough on my rib cage right here, and I put this on my pelvis right there, I'd say, okay, there goes my pelvis, then my rib cage is going. So you can see this is moving a little bit separately of where the box is moving right there.
Yeah, and I think that's good, right, on separation. The general idea of, hey, you want to go pelvis, rib cage, shoulders. You don't want to go the opposite way. Some of those feels that we talked through, and I think a really good place to start, like Trevor said, in the mirror and looking at yourself with the club across, right? If you get a club across the pelvis, club across your shoulders, see the pelvis separating from the upper. And for some of you, you're going to need to work on that to be able to feel that. Like even me, I could really feel my body separating there. Like he said, it takes time with that. Then you introduce a ball as you go, slow and steady, and build up speed. And there's lots of drills we can do for this. These obviously are just a couple.
Absolutely.
You know, just to start you off. So that's separation. What you want to do is sort of ground up, right? Pelvis, ribcage, shoulder. You don't want to go top down. We're going to do more in our next video on how to actually slow the arms down. We talked a little bit here to be able to slow the arms down, to give yourself time to do some of the stuff with the body. So look out for that video next. If you want to contact Trevor, we're going to put his info in the link in the description down below. Whether you want to do in-person lessons, online lessons, we'll put that all down below. Thank you guys for watching.